This is the next review for the new Wineskins class meeting the Sunday school class at Living Legacy, and we're in the Gospel of Mark, and we're right at about a halfway point. I'm going to be really quick with this one, I hope, but it's what's frequently called Peter's confession. And it's very crucial and important. It's right about in the middle of the gospel, and it's kind of a turning point in the full account. It's halfway through the gospel, and it kind of divides. The first half is pretty much the Galilean ministry, and it's kind of setting forth who Jesus is through a bit of teaching, but primarily through miracles and healings and so forth. Then we have Peter's confession of who Jesus is, and then after this, it kind of is starting to move closer to Jesus's heading for Jerusalem and his coming, his crucifixion. So we're in chapter 8, and we're looking at verse 27. And it reads, "And Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that I am?' And they told him, 'John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets.' And he asked them, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Peter answered him, 'You are the Christ.'" And that would be, you are the promised Messiah. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. He goes on in verse 31, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and he must be rejected of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." And he said this to them plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." So we want to look at this and ask not only why does Jesus refer to Peter here as Satan, but also it's not recorded here, but in the other Gospels, I'm thinking particularly of Matthew, when Peter confesses, "You're the Christ, the Messiah," Jesus responds to him, "Blessed are you, Peter, because you didn't figure this out on your own. You're not guessing. God in heaven revealed this to you." And then moments later, after you're blessed because God has revealed this to you, he says, "Get behind me, Satan." So what is it that Peter, I think to understand why Jesus refers to Peter when he makes this statement, why he refers to him as Satan. And to look at that, we need to see, well, what was Peter saying to him? Jesus was telling them, after Peter confesses, announces, "You're the promised Messiah, you're the Christ, the one that the whole Testament has been preparing the way for. That's who we understand you to be, not just another teacher, not another prophet, you're the Christ." And then Jesus goes on, it says, and he says this plainly to them, "The Messiah, myself, must go to Jerusalem, be rejected, and killed." And Peter intervenes and says, "No." And he rebukes Jesus. And again, in other Gospels, this will never happen. What Peter was rebuking him for was the idea of a suffering Messiah, of a Messiah who has come not to kick out the Romans and establish a new kingdom of Israel, return it to its former glory. But Jesus was speaking plainly to them that the Messiah promised to come had come to die. And this was a mystery to the 12. And to Peter. And Peter rebukes him, saying, "No, that's not the Messiah we want." Where does that leave us, in a sense? And we see that because Jesus then goes on further. We didn't read this part, but Jesus goes on further, This is where he talks about you have to take up your cross. He talks about, Peter, you're seeking your own good welfare. You're putting more importance on this life than the next. You're disturbed and distressed about my death, but I'm telling you there are more important things than this material world, this life's life and death issues. There are more important issues. And so he rebukes Peter. But again, why Satan? Why can't Peter just be mistaken? Why can't Jesus just, explain it further? Why is he so stern in saying, "Get behind me, Satan"? And we look at that and we see, what was Peter rebuke? How did that rebuke come across? What was he saying? He was trying to dissuade the king from establishing his kingdom through suffering and death. Through Jesus' death, he redeems for himself a people, and that's the citizenship of his kingdom. Jesus came as a king to accomplish and acquire his kingdom. Peter is trying to tell him to leave that and to enjoy a kingdom, a state of Israel kicking out the Jews without suffering. Who else did that, we have to ask. And if you look at the temptation of Jesus at the beginning of his ministry, after his baptism, he goes into the wilderness for 40 days. That's exactly what Satan tempts Jesus with. He says, "Bow down and worship me, and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world." Satan is saying, you don't have to die and suffer for a kingdom. I'll give you kingdoms for free. You don't have to do the work you've come to do to get them, which is die in our place, suffer on the cross. Satan says, I'll just hand over to you all the kingdoms of the world if you bow down to me. So Satan's scheme there was to dissuade Jesus from his mission and to offer him a kingdom without suffering. And what's interesting is at the end of that, when Jesus rebukes Satan, it says, and Satan left him for a season. We get the impression Satan. So I think this reference here to with Jesus saying, "Blessed are you, Peter. God in heaven has revealed to you that I'm the Messiah. You're blessed for understanding, for knowing, for speaking that." But then moments later, "Get behind me, Satan," because he tries to tempt Jesus, to offer Jesus a kingdom without the suffering. His rebuke of Jesus is, no, don't go to Jerusalem. Don't get crucified. Where does that leave all of us, your followers? Their idea was a Messiah who was going to reestablish a Jewish throne and kingdom. So what I hope this points out again, besides the mere truth and fact of this text, is that if you look at Scripture in context, if you back up a bit and come forward to where you are, to understand that, you go a little bit further and you look in context what he said before, because what did happen just before this? Just before this account of Peter's confession, Jesus heals the blind man, but he heals him in stages. It's the only account in Scripture where Jesus didn't just speak the word or touch somebody and they were healed. There were instances where he wasn't even with the person. He just tells someone else, "Go home, your daughter is healed." Doesn't even have to have contact with the person, and instantly they're perfectly healed. But this blind man, he heals him and says, "Can you see?" And the guy says, "I see men, but they're like trees. I don't see real well." Jesus touches his eyes again and says, "Now can you?" And he says, "Now I see perfectly." He didn't have to do that. There's a reason why Jesus, who could have just said, "You're healed," and he had perfect vision, there's a reason why he healed him in these stages. And when we come to the very next passage, here's Peter saying, "You're the Christ, the Messiah. I know and understand this. God has revealed this to me. You are the Christ." but he doesn't know who the Messiah is. He doesn't know the work of the Messiah. He knows Jesus is the Messiah, but he thinks the Messiah's work is to establish the throne. He's getting in his, it's almost like you could ask Peter here, do you see who Jesus is? And Peter would say, I see him like a tree, like I see him sort of. He still needs to understand. They all need to understand um, not only that Jesus is the Messiah, but who the Messiah is, what his work is, what he's to do. So that's where we are. We're coming up then. The very next thing to happen is the revelation, the revealing of who Jesus is. Here he asks them, who do you say that I am? The next thing to happen is what we call the transfiguration, where Jesus takes Peter and others and goes to the hill and reveals his glory to him. So what I hope we get out of this, again, is not just an understanding of the text that we're dealing with, but we get an insight into how to understand Scripture, how to read and study and understand it. That we, even though it's in chapter and verse, we can't just open anywhere, pull out a passage, and think that because that's just what those words say, that's we know the meaning. You have to kind of look back and come up to it, go on and see what happened. And if you see it in the whole context, that passage can make so much more sense to you. And of course, the purpose of it all is that we know who Jesus is, that we embrace the truth of who he is, and thereby are convicted and uh, experience conversion and are filled with his Spirit and can serve and glorify him. And we'll look and see what happens next with the transfiguration. Thank you.